What comes to mind when you think about the Port Authority? What comes to mind when you think about the Port Authority? Please tell us in the chat. So, as you are pondering that grim thought, let's go with something a little nicer. Let's talk about the old Penn Station. It was a monumental structure with miles of tunnels underneath and a complicated construction process. But the results were breathtaking. Penn Station was an important link in the transit system beginning in 1910 and running all the way through today. It connected New Jersey with Manhattan, with Long Island to the east, New England to the northeast, and the vast nation that lay beyond. But over the years, Penn Station developed a very unlikely appendage. It was an Art Deco bus terminal located right up against the station. And that bus terminal had 7 other cousins throughout Midtown. See, millions of people had flowed through Penn Station in its prime. But after World War II, the Pennsylvania Railroad's money started to dry up. This was thanks, in part, to some rubber-tired competitors and a shiny new tunnel located just footsteps from Penn. Now, this Art Deco bus terminal next to Penn Station, the need for more bus parking space, more bus gates, it eventually outgrew this and the other cousins. So plans were drawn up for a flashy, consolidated, bright, cheery, and as you see in this old postcard, new facility located nearby. A monumental structure began to rise. And in 1950, the ribbons were cut on a true temple to the expressway age. And as for that old train station nearby, Penn Station, most people, it was the past. So the wrecking balls came for Pennsylvania Station as a drearier, dingier form of travel took hold in Gotham. Now, over the years, the Port Authority bus terminal grew and grew with demand. But the whole place became dingier and dingier still. Not something that was bad about the people who worked there, the dedicated bus drivers and staff, but the way that our society thinks about the type of people who use the bus. In fact, using the Port Authority bus terminal became an ordeal almost as bad as bus travel itself. And today, the Port Authority bus terminal, it is quite literally falling apart at the seams. And there's a big problem too. Lucy, I see in the chat, you're saying the ceiling shake, waiting for a bus to fall through. Well, you might actually get your wish sometime soon, because since the facility opened in 1950, buses have been using it almost 24 hours a day for over a half century. And what happens in the wintertime? Well, road salt gets on bus tires and it corrodes the concrete. The structure is literally falling apart. So we actually have a once-in-a-generation opportunity right now to fix today's dingy Port Authority bus terminal and come up with something grander and greener for the 21st century. So here's how I would like to proceed this evening, and I hope you're willing to come along with me. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got the Port Authority. Next, I want to give you a tour of what exactly it is, and you may be equipped to be some of the few people out there who actually know how to use it. And finally, I hope that we can turn to a discussion of what it could be, so that we could have a grand gateway befitting the world's greatest metropolis. So let's begin at the very beginning with my initial question to you. What comes to mind when you think about the Port Authority? The smell, I see David Bragdon has written. Homeless, Renee Stanley wrote. Buses, Steve Friedman has shared with us. And one of my favorites from Lucy, Dante's levels of hell and standing online for a long, long time. People have used more colorful adjectives over the years. But what comes to my mind is the name itself, the Port Authority Bus Terminal. Why is it called the Port Authority Bus Terminal? Because it is run, it was opened, created by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which is a very special bird, as their logo suggests. Why is the Port Authority so special? It is special because it belongs to two states, New York and New Jersey. But it also really belongs to neither of them. It is an independent bi-state agency that funds its own operations. So think back to the beginning of the last century, when New York's port was actually a little too busy. As this beautiful mural suggests from the jury room at 60 Center Street, the New York County Courthouse, it was a bustling, bustling harbor, but a little too bustling. In addition to that, 7 different railroads contributed to that congestion because they all brought their freight in and out of the port in 7 different ways. It was a very congested process, a very disorganized process, a very antiquated process, a very labor-intensive process, and it left the waterways so clogged that it was difficult to even get from point A to point B. Here's an example of what I'm talking about, and in the years prior to the Port Authority's creation, there was a big discussion of lighterage, which is a very antiquated phrase, but this gives you a look at it. Cargo would go from trains, would be transferred manually many times onto barges, and then those barges would be floated to slips alongside ships heading all around the nation and world. And think about that in both ways, because goods were coming in and coming out. It was a maddening, labor-intensive, costly, disorganized process. And it really did threaten at the beginning of the last century to dethrone New York's status as port of the nation and port of the world. So finally, by the 1920s, local leaders really had had enough. They didn't know exactly what to do. They had some thoughts about it, but they knew they had to do something. It almost is akin to the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11, where in that case, we took a bunch of agencies and smushed them together, and we hoped that would increase Homeland Security by increasing coordination and this and that. Not the same idea, but a similar idea with the Port Compact of 1921. New York and New Jersey leaders got together. Each individual legislature in each state passed a resolution that said, basically, we want a port authority. We want to coordinate the disorganized port problem in the Port of New York. And it went to the Congress of the United States, which ratified it. And that Port Compact of 1921 gave us the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a bi-state agency. It was known as the Port of New York Authority at the time. But the bottom line is, the Port Authority, that very strange bird, it was born. There was just one slight problem, because we had this flashy new authority, we had this mandate that we wanted to solve things, but they weren't able to get these private railroads to coordinate and go along with their plans. So much like other agencies out there, The Port Authority had to figure out some way to justify its existence. So what did it do? In the name of fulfilling its mandate, it looked at the Port District, which extends from the Statue of Liberty all throughout New York and New Jersey for a number of miles. And it did things like build bridges. This is the Bayonne Bridge. We have the George Washington Bridge, the Goethals Bridge. It also built tunnels. You can see this happy picture at the opening of the Holland Tunnel. When people dressed a little more dapper back in the day, but the joy was real because they were improving the Port District, even though their plans for fixing the port problem as they really considered it, that lighterage issue with the barges and the trains and the ships, they're building tunnels. Holland Tunnel was already under construction. They assumed control. They built the Lincoln Tunnel, as we discussed earlier. They also took a look at the airports in the region. This is an early shot of Newark Airport. They eventually assumed control over LaGuardia Airport, Stewart Airport upstate, Atlantic City Airport in New Jersey, which is outside the Port District, JFK. These became under the Port Authority's control as well, which is why you'll see their logo when you pass through those facilities and you see their cops on the beat. And they also undertook a wide array of other types of projects, like this inland freight terminal. Now, you folks in the chat, does anyone recognize this building? I'll give you a hint. It's on the west side of Manhattan, sort of near the Chelsea Market. Can anyone name what it is? Exactly, David got it. Google headquarters. It occupies a massive city block. It actually has more floor space than the Empire State Building. Google, I believe, paid cash for that structure, which should give you an idea of how formidable that corporation is. But this inland freight terminal was a means of solving that port problem. There were to be multiple inland freight terminals all around the Port District. This is the scale and scope of the type of thing we're talking about when we talk about the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And so eventually, Mayor LaGuardia, Fiorello LaGuardia, the Little Flower, the Great Depression era mayor, he who helped advance the career of folks like Robin Moses, LaGuardia was fed up with another problem. And he thought, look, this Port Authority is doing big things. Maybe they can help us with our congestion problem. We remember that little Art Deco bus terminal near Penn Station and its 7 sisters throughout Midtown. This was sort of how you got on and off buses in the day. There were crowds of people on the sidewalks, on the streets, on these vacant lots where you boarded buses. They were scattered all over the place. They weren't consolidated. They were not under common control and management. A lot of private carriers were coordinating these. But worst of all, it was choking the streets with traffic. And as we spoke about in the beginning of our discussion, a lot of these buses were starting to usurp trains in the expressway age. And so it was bus after bus after bus clogging the streets, making Midtown a really awful place to drive, to walk, and to experience life. Because it's a lot like 42nd Street of today, where you walk around and you see all these private carriers doing their thing on the bus curbs. They're selling tickets, they're waving cash around, there's exhaust belching. It's sort of a difficult situation. So LaGuardia said, look, Port Authority, we need to deal with this situation. Can you help? And of course, the Port Authority looking for additional reasons to exist. And I commend a book to all of you called Empire on the Hudson if you want a little bit more on this history. I'm going to put that in the chat right now. The Port Authority and its engineers took a look. And they said, look, Pennsylvania Station, Grand Central Terminal, Midtown Manhattan, the Lincoln Tunnel, all of these things converge in this almost perfect site over here on the west side of Midtown. It's near the mouths of our new Lincoln Tunnel. It's in a Midtown location so that folks can get to and from where they need to go. I mean, way back then, people went into offices for work. Can you imagine that? And so they set their eyes on this 42nd Street site, steps from Broadway, steps from Commerce, steps from the tunnel, and they began to draw up plans. The Port Authority bus terminal, a full block structure with ties to the tunnel. They were getting ready for their Broadway debut in many ways because it would bear the name of the structure, of the authority, rather. And so that brings us to that original building, that cheery yellow building that we discussed over on the west side of Midtown Manhattan. 8th Avenue on the eastern front, 9th Avenue on the west, 40th Street on the bottom, 41st Street on the top. That is the site of the original Port Authority bus terminal as it opened in 1950. And that is the site of what is known as the South Building today, because the Port Authority bus terminal, in that cheery mid-century sense, it never went away. It was really only shrouded over. But that's the original site. That's the original building. Now, on the western portion, that's where the buses got in and out, as they do to this day. The buses got in and out of the Port Authority bus terminal through a massive set of ramps that really did connect directly to the Lincoln Tunnel system. So LaGuardia's mandate, hey, our streets are clogged, we're breathing in all this exhaust, please help us. Quite literally, the buses were carried over the city streets from the Lincoln Tunnel into this new consolidated facility. So there would no longer be 8 different stations. There would just be one facility. And if you look on the top of the building, there's a massive parking deck as well, where you could drive your cars in the Lincoln Tunnel and park in the heart of Midtown, walk to the theater, walk to shopping. It was a coordinated system. And then on the eastern edge, we had connectivity to Times Square. And what do I mean by Times Square? Not just Times Square with the lights, but the massive subway complex that is underneath. It is where all the lines in the city converge. And so you could get off your bus and you could either walk to your destination, as many people do to this day, or you could take the train off to wherever you needed to be. Here's a 1954 aerial view of the entire site. You can see that big white space. That is the bus terminal occupying that full city block that we looked at before. And it is stretching its wings all the way to the Lincoln Tunnel portals, which you can see on the bottom left-hand portion of your screen. And then there are those serpentine ramps that connected directly to the Lincoln Tunnel system so that the buses were taken off the city streets. And the whole thing was monumental. It was also designed in a very streamlined style, a very ship-like style. And you'll recall people were coming in on one end, on that eastern end, buses on the other end. The whole thing really was an homage to the Port Authority's roots. It was, in fact, designed to resemble a ship, and it sort of functions like a ship as well. You know, if you think about coming in on the front and then leaving on the back, that may not be technically how you board a ship, but it has a very streamlined and coherent feel. It has a feel of something that was a system. And the inside of this terminal was crisp and Spartan. It's what you would expect in the 50s. It was very functional. It was very steel and wood paneled, if you will, a cheery outside with plenty of concessions inside. And it was replete with the type of amenities that you really would expect in those days. Maybe in the chat, we can talk a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing in this beautiful picture from shortly after the Port Authority bus terminal opened. Now, one of my favorite things in this image is the gentleman at the far left of the screen leaning up at the information counter. Can you imagine such things? I mean, there are allegedly information counters in the Port Authority of today, but they don't look anything like this. But this gentleman with his bow tie casually leaning in to find out on the next bus to Montclair or wherever he's headed, it is a very different vibe from the Port Authority we enjoy today. Now, in terms of the buses themselves, buses boarded up on top if you were headed out to the suburbs, and down on the bottom, below street level, that's where the intercity buses would leave from as well. And Lucy is writing in the chat that counter is either the Walgreens or Obsolete. That is absolutely correct. That is the location we are talking about. The Obsolete is right there today. It may be shut down, and the Duane Reade is just past it. And the Escalator Bank that we see in the distance. We're going to be talking a little bit about that space later on, where we talk about what we've done with it today. So again, commuter buses up there on top, and then on the lower levels, your intercity buses. And that's a format that really has endured with us to this day. It's a little different now. We have New Jersey Transit just celebrated its 40th anniversary last summer. New Jersey Transit consolidated a lot of the bus systems. I see Jerry wrote in the chat, he's talking about public service. New Jersey Transit assumed the public service system along with others back in the 80s, 40 years ago. And so the upper level is now quite literally New Jersey Transit Hub. Down in the basement of that south building is now where you'll find private carriers of a more inner city nature, but I'm not talking about Greyhound. I'm talking about Transbridge. When it existed, DeCamp, I believe, had a few departures from there. The more intermediate to New Jersey and out to Pennsylvania and other areas. And we'll get to the north building a little bit later. But that's the basic system. Commuters up top, longer distance on the bottom. And of course, that escalator bank that we saw in the background of that last photograph. The escalators were really a pride of the Port Authority bus terminal. They were very proud of these escalators. There were some issues with them, but you can see back in the day, Austin Tobin proudly walking people around the structure, pointing out these escalators. They really were a novelty back then. And they were what allowed people to be whisked up and whisked down to quickly get to their bus gates. And so these escalators were a point of pride for Tobin, who ran the Port Authority at the time, and was a true driving force in getting this terminal to be a reality. So the ribbons were cut December of 1950. You will find this original plaque up near McCann's, the bar in the South Building, up on the commuter level. But when those ribbons were cut, it felt like a coordinated system. And I see that the sound quality is deteriorating. If anyone else is having issues, please let us know. I'm speaking into the mic, so hopefully you can hear us. Eric is saying the sound is fine. But back in December of 1950, the entire thing felt like a coordinated system. That was not so for much longer. This is one of my favorite images of the Port Authority bus terminal system because it really does show you the connectivity with the Lincoln Tunnel system. And this image was taken in 1964. You'll see the McGraw-Hill building, a New York City landmark. It's up there to the left of the Port Authority building. It's that sort of green-colored building that is touching the sky. We don't yet have the New York Times headquarters that we would ordinarily see just beyond the Port Authority bus terminal. But what do we see? We see ramps leading into the old structure. We did see those ramps before, but we see a newer, a more 70s style set of ramps. You know, actually, I would call it 1964 style ramps leading up to those 3 new parking decks on top of the Port Authority bus terminal. Do you see those? Does everybody see those? There are 3 decks in the center, and I'll give you a better look at them here. This is when the Port Authority started to grow. We remember our ship-like structure from earlier, but now we're starting to see various appendages and accretions added. Look at the front where it says Port Authority Bus Terminal. In the earlier images we saw this evening, there were cars parked there. But what do we see just to the right of terminal? We see a bus, because that space is now being used for loading and unloading of commuter buses as well. It really started to burst at the seams at this point. And then we have 3 layers of revenue producing cars up on those 3 parking decks. They're parking, and folks are doing what they used to do before, but the capacity is greatly expanded. And all of this remains there to this day, right? You will see, if you go up to those upper levels today, if you take an elevator up, you can go to these parking decks. And if you're looking up at the Port Authority from the surrounding areas, you will see this distinctive shape. The building never left us. It just looks a little different. But those differences really started to come to pass in the 80s. You'll see here a companion plaque to the one that we saw earlier. This one dedicated May 20th, 1981. That's when the building took on the look that we know today, right? Borrowing a lot of imagery from the mid-century. We see the same font, for example, that we see over at the Seagram building. We see tiles with orange, similar to Philip Johnson's Midtown subway station experiment and the companion Bowling Green station downtown. We see a very different look. It's bolder, it's brasher, it's bossier, it's rude. Um, and then we get the North Building, which leaves people with no clue. It's no longer this ship-like structure where you could actually find yourself around because it was intuitive. You come in on the right, you're leaving your bus on the left. Instead, it splinters as a north wing is added to the bus terminal. Next to the McGraw-Hill building, there used to be lower rise structures there, but the north wing is added in 1981, and that really makes the floor plan splinter. The north wing now, just to give you a little bit of bearings, if you're familiar with the terminal, on the lower level, that's where you would catch your Greyhound and your Peter Pan buses, your inner city buses. On the upper levels, you would catch some New Jersey Transit buses. The north wing is actually a little lower than the south wing. There is a deck of parking on top, but you can see those other additional decks that are still on the south building. The north wing also stretches over 41st Street in a massive sort of bridge over the street. It darkens it. You can't look up at the sky. Instead, you're looking up at the north wing. It bridges over 41st Street, and it also bridges under 41st Street. So I think this is what is responsible for a lot of the chaos for folks who are using the Port Authority. First of all, there are no real departure boards. These days, there are little kiosks where you can put your bus line in and it'll tell you approximately where they're boarding, except maybe not, except yes. It's very hard for these private carriers who work on very thin margins, and we're seeing that a lot of them are going under with COVID. It's hard for them to be able to invest in providing the Port Authority itself, the managers, with good information. It's hard to track all that stuff, especially for little private carriers like the ones who are living out of the basement. But even without the signage, setting that aside, the lack of actual continuity, the way that this is all laid out, it's not intuitive. It's sinking the ship-like structure that we had before. It's why the space is so maddening. So, we started with this. We started with a cheery yellow mid-century bus terminal that was compact and it made sense. And then we ended up with, dark glass for one, a very 80s postmodern look, sort of on that transition from brutalism to postmodernism, where they shrouded what existed there before with cold steel and dark glass, where they cantilevered over 41st Street and under 41st Street. So the whole thing is massive and you can't really intuitively find yourself around. And the whole thing dominates you. It's not like Grand Central Terminal, where Grand Central is a large structure, but it's a very usable structure. Or think about 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, where it's, again, a monumental structure, high ceilings, massive on the outside, but a very familiar space, and it pulls you through. Think about some of the European stations. Even think, and it has its flaws, but think about the new PATH station downtown, the Calatrava, the Stegosaurus building. That also pulls you through. Unfortunately, by shrouding over what existed there before, by building the North Building, and not really investing over the years in bus travelers who, let's face it, are not always wealthy people. And even if they are wealthier, say if they're commuting to the Jersey suburbs, Port Authority commissioners up until recently were a largely real estate minded, white, male, old school, clubby group, and they didn't have much of an understanding that ordinary people deserve dignity and respect too. And so over the years, the decline really became palpable. And I just want to cycle you through some pictures here. This, we have Erica in the chat here saying, that's the building I know. This is absolutely the building we know of today. The signage leaves a lot to be desired. What does 400 gates mean, right? If you don't know where your bus is going, it's really not like an airport or even a well-run train station. We have this slapdash standalone signage to the right of that escalator. It looks like it's been done on Microsoft Paint or Microsoft Word. And the whole thing is just dingy. It's not clean. It's not familiar. It's not friendly. Again, I don't mean to impugn the good people who run the terminal, many of whom I do count among my friends and colleagues, but they're dealing with a bad debt here. Just look at the ceilings, right? The ceilings are falling apart. They've made some efforts in recent years to try and deal with the ceilings in certain portions, but it's a massive structure and it's falling apart, as we discussed in the beginning. And then there's the issue of the people who call the building their home, right? We live in a society, and it should not be this way. And I'm very grateful for people like Sarah Feinberg over at MTA, who may not be striking the perfect tone, but who's saying, look, we are transit agencies, right? We are not homeless service agencies. We are not equipped for people to live here, nor should people live here. Every human being deserves dignity. And I don't think, and I think everyone in this presentation tonight would agree with me, it is not dignified to call the Port Authority bus terminal your home. It is not dignified to even use the Port Authority bus terminal. So why are we allowing this to continue to exist? Now, this I love. It captures the sort of 80s shrouding where they covered everything up with those brown bricks. We have the lighting dingy up top. We have this blue stylized version of what the building looks like. Now notice it's flipped. So people coming out of this doorway, this is a doorway, would be looking at it properly. You can see up top of the blue, you see the sort of shape of the old building, how it was shrouded. And then look over a little bit, you see how it's cantilevered over 41st Street. There's that space for the street. And look, someone jokingly slapped a warning, toxic gas exposure label over it. Probably because when you go through the Port Authority bus terminal, all you do is breathe in fumes. It smells gross because there are buses going through there. Wouldn't an open air facility like we had back in the 40s, potentially something a little more organized, wouldn't that be a nicer experience for folks? The ticket counters. It looks like where you go to post bond. It's deserted. It's strange looking. It's a time warp. Again, everything in the structure is telling you, you don't matter. We don't care about you, bus passenger. The concessions. Again, there have been some strides in recent years. Leadership has been doing what's called a quality of commute initiative, trying to give a little bit better of an experience to everyday folks, but the Port Authority is still where you go to buy a lottery ticket. We do have some people with fond memories in the chat of the bowling alley in the building, and that is an enjoyable place for many. But most people don't use the bowling alley. Most people use it to catch a bus. It's a depressing and dingy space. So eventually the Board of Commissioners for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, they eventually woke up to the fact that the Port Authority bus terminal stinks. How did they wake up to it? Well, they didn't wake up to it because they use it every day. They literally had to be taken on a bus on a tour of the facility so they could see it firsthand. And the second they saw it, they said, oh my God, we can't possibly let people use this structure. It's awful. Again, speaking to the disconnect, and it has gotten better in recent years. They have brought women. They've brought people with a wider range of experience onto the board. But for a while, it looks like a country club. Loretta Weinberg, we're seeing in the chat, she is the distinguished senator from the state of New Jersey. Loretta really has helped as well. She's put pressure. She represents North Jersey, so folks who really do rely on their terminal to commute. She put a lot of public pressure on the board. So they finally went in and they used it. They said, my God, how are we subjecting people to this every day of the week? This is not where you should start and end your commutes. So they figured, we're going to do something about it. We just can't really figure out what. They threw an international design competition. They were doing all sorts of grand schemes, but at the end of the day, they couldn't figure out, this is a massive structure. It's built up so much over the years. We looked at the 60s edition earlier. We looked at the 80s edition. We looked at everything that's happened there since. And it is just a bear. And how do you take it out of service, right? With so many people relying on it. This is one of my favorite quotes. David Steiner, Keeping It Real, one of the Jersey commissioners on the Port Commission. Quote, we are so out of our league, we don't know what the hell we are doing. I think that really characterizes the level of paralysis that was going on at the Port Authority for quite a bit, as they were trying to consider how in the world do we fix this. And then something else happened. I want to see if anyone in the chat knows what I'm talking about here. Who can get it? I'm going to take a little sip of water. Aha, Lucy, you are correct once again. And Jerry, Bridgegate. We see Governor Chris Christie with his little ball in the center of the George Washington Bridge, which is, after all, the world's busiest bridge. David writes, time for some traffic problems in Fort Lee. That was the infamous text message from, I believe it was Bridget Ann Kelly, to Governor Christie's fellow minions. This was a political plot. This is a political plot to punish Mark Sokolich, the mayor of Fort Lee, New Jersey, on the Jersey side of the George Washington Bridge, punish him for not endorsing Chris Christie. And how did they punish him? They reduced the number of lanes leading into the toll plaza at the George Washington Bridge from 3 to 1, unannounced during the first week of school and during 9/11, the commemoration week. So the result was complete chaos, and it did not look good for the Port Authority of New Jersey at all. They looked like a political plaything. They looked like the type of folks who couldn't get things done. And in the meantime, they had this gigantic Midtown bus terminal with their name literally on it. It didn't send a good message about the agency, New York's most hated building. And look at those faces. So that's around the time that I started thinking about how to make the Port Authority bus terminal a little bit more humane. I had recently, before starting a new job, been traveling through France. And all of their transit hubs, they had pianos. And people would come up to me when I would go and play, and they were really, really happy to hear the music. And, you know, French train stations are, for the most part, very nice. And they were made nicer by the live music. And I knew about the spot. Anybody remember those escalators? Now, this ABP below is no longer open, but those escalators I'm talking about are from that image that we looked at earlier, and then the other image with the gentleman at the counter. This space was called the Fishbowl back in the day. This was actually the operations control center for the Port Authority bus terminal, and people with suits and ties would be bustling around there, making you think that they were supervising things, and they were supervising things, and there was some modicum of control over the space. But after 9/11, folks were very sad to learn that terrorism was indeed a reality. Dennis was there on 9/11. Dennis, I apologize for you having to deal with that. That was a very traumatic time for the city. And one thing that leaders realized is that someone could chuck a weapon, a bomb, into that space, and it would destroy the operations control center. So they moved that behind the scenes. And as a result, this sort of vacant space that used to be bustling and used was sitting there in the center of the South Building, where 225,000, 250,000 trips were beginning and ending each day. And this is what people looked like. It was urban decay in the heart of the biggest and busiest bus terminal on the globe. And it was there for everyone to see. And it was really a metaphor for what happened to this space over time. So thinking back to France, thought maybe a piano could help liven up that space, make it a little better, but more importantly, make the Port Authority bus terminal itself a little bit better. And it sort of had a tint of irony. I love this report. I had read this prior to coming up with this thought of putting a piano there. Redesigning hell, preventing crime and disorder at the Port Authority bus terminal. See, back in the 80s renovation, one of the things that really happened in the wake of that was Times Square was not, the playground that it is today. Right? Times Square was the sort of place where, there were prostitutes, there was drug use. It was not a nice place to be in many respects. It was certainly an interesting place to be, but a lot of that spilled over into the Port Authority bus terminal. And so one thing that folks did during that time, they put classical music on the speakers in the bus terminal. And sometimes you even hear that to this day. This is pulled right from that Redesigning Hell report. Port Authority officials also feel that the classical music calms travelers, welcomes suburban commuters, there's some coded language for you, and discourages transient young hustlers from remaining, since they tend not to like that kind of music. Oh my. So I thought it would be kind of ironic because you'd be bringing in music to make people happier. So I was doing a transportation fellowship at the time down at the Rudin Center, and I was able to meet some folks who had some connections in this realm. And we started to brainstorm on how we could make this happen. I also secured a grant from the Awesome Foundation, which is just as awesome as it sounds. And I think that all of you who have interesting ideas, you should go to the Awesome Foundation and apply for one of their grants. They give out little $1,000 grants for folks, and they allow you to make your project happen. And they got behind this project. And I'm seeing Albert writing in the chat, this is so cool. Before it became a security center, the Fishbowl used to have entertainment. I was in a chorus in high school in the 60s. We used to go there as well as other courses from other schools and provided Christmas carols and holiday music for a few weeks before Christmas. That's so special, Albert. I'm glad you have that memory. We did talk about that in our initial meetings with the agency about bringing back that sort of spirit from earlier days. And one of the things I'm proud of, and we'll see the space in a little bit, is that we were able to have a Christmas show as well with my alma mater, my old high school. They came down and they performed. So it was a really special thing. Thank you for sharing that memory, Albert. So the question remained, though, we were going to put a piano in this space, liven the joint up, but how in the world do you get one? But my mind sort of turned to Sing for Hope, which is a great foundation. They bring those pianos to the public parks in New York. We're all familiar with those. I think it was unfortunately suspended this year, but they're all about bringing joy into the city. And this aligns squarely with their mission. So I gave them a call, and they were down with it. Here we are with the piano movers loading that piano into the Fishbowl back in 2016. And there are those two piano movers, they're assembling it. You can see the Fishbowl. You can see curious people in the background thinking, what in the world is going on there? But we're in the center of that massive escalator bank that we saw in that earlier photo. In the renovation, I believe what they must have done is pushed the escalators to the side to create the Fishbowl, just based on some of the dimensions. Don't quote me on that. I have, obviously it's not there in the 60s. I'm a little too young, but that's the spot that we're talking about, and they're there assembling it. Then we brought in an artist named Patrick Freeman, and here he is painting a really groovy design on the side of it, very intently there. And we cut the ribbons, and it was a really nice addition to the space. It gave people something to be happy about in the Port Authority bus terminal. And it was a fantastic experience for all of us. Brought a little bit of levity into a space that makes people feel quite the opposite. Here we are on opening day. An opera singer joined us that day, and it really just echoed throughout the space. Now, Yorkman was saying the sound echoes. I think you might have been talking about the system that we're using tonight for him who might be having some technical difficulties. But the sound in the Fishbowl space really echoes as well. It's the closest thing that the bus terminal has to a great hall, and it really is a focal point now. And I encourage all of you to go with a mask and visit it, because it's a really special place to be. And I even got a chance to be a regular performer there as well, which was really nice. As I said, bringing my high school in, bringing friends, collaborators in, to breathe a little bit of life in. So we obviously can't go there this evening, but what I would like to do is show you guys inside. So here's a brief video presentation, and just take a listen. All right, so we're back. Now, there was a question from Jay-Z, and I don't think it was that Jay-Z, although I'm sure that person is somewhere close in terms of notoriety, but asking about the glamorous bathroom. That's a little side story, so you guys can go look at that one. But there's a look inside of the Fishbowl. Um, it's a fun space, and I learned a lot of lessons from that experience. It's now a place that's open to the public. We got a second piano in the North Building as well, where you don't need a reservation to go in. But throughout the process, throughout working with the people who are the leaders, I learned a couple of things. First of all, keep matters positive. At the time, I was working as deputy director of a group called the Historic Districts Council, and I saw a lot of movements were focusing on things like no, stop, don't do this, don't do that. We took kind of a different approach. This is just an example. We were at the Waldorf Astoria's Interiors. You may remember that Anbang, the Chinese corporation, took over the Waldorf recently. And there was a threat to demolish the interior spaces. So we worked hard to get that space made an interior landmark. And in doing so, we had a fun event where people came and explored the space. And we used something positive in order to tell a story and to breathe life into a space that was at risk of being forgotten. And that positive angle, it really helped. It made people smile, it made people think, and it made people realize, hey, let's fight for this spot. And I really tried to take a similar tack at the Port Authority bus terminal because it's neglected and hated space to many people, many New Yorkers, many outsiders. We all read the Dante-esque quotes in our chat earlier today. So we want to make sure that we're keeping things positive in our efforts moving forward. Another thing I learned was to break rules and make up later. We did end up having an article in the New York Times. I did serve as a bit of a leak to the press because I wanted to make sure the project moved along, and a lot of folks at the Port Authority weren't too happy about that. And it was mainly about how the article was written, but at the end of the day, it got a lot of exposure for our project, and it did push it along. And people now know they can meet at the piano like they meet at the clock at Grand Central Terminal, which is kind of a special thing. And the final lesson, and I apologize for this image in advance, but never let a good crisis go to waste, right? Governor Christie blocking the George Washington Bridge, plunging the agency really into chaos. They needed a win, right? And to the piano was an olive branch. It was a positive news story all over the media. And it also really made people happy and proud about the space where they worked. But I am under no illusions, right? Like a piano cannot fix the Port Authority question. It's a profoundly damaged space. Pigeons to the side, as we mentioned earlier. So I thought, why not apply those three principles to fixing the Port Authority as it exists today? And that brings us to part 3, what it could. Now look, there was an article in the New York Post, I believe it was 2 days ago, and it was entitled "New York City is Dead." And that is not something that I think anyone on this chat can get on, anyone in this presentation can get on. New York will be with us, COVID or no COVID. Is this better, folks? Are we able to hear? Are you able to hear me better? Okay, perfect. New York will be with us way after COVID. It remains the center of it all and the gateway to everywhere. And it deserves a fantastic gateway for bus travelers. But that's just not the case today. The Port Authority bus terminal, we have spent almost an hour describing its failings today, and it is in desperate need of correction. And people are really starting to raise their voice. Up until COVID, when people were using this space every day, they had pressured the Board of Commissioners. We had mention of Loretta Weinberg in the chat. The commissioners themselves went through. People are demanding change. And there have been a lot of efforts and initiatives recently. We discussed earlier some of the chaos around trying to figure out the replacement on the Board of Commissioners side. Now they're really buckling down, and they're considering very seriously 3 alternatives. This is the first alternative. This is what the Regional Plan Association, a fantastic organization, proposed. They would like to move the intercity buses. So we're talking lower level of the north building, to an extent, the lower level of the south building. They're talking about moving those to the lower level of the Javits Center and then renovating the Port Authority for commuter arrivals and departures on its current footprint. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, there's the Javits Center on the left where it says Convention Center. There's the bus terminal on the right where it says Rehabilitated Bus Terminal. But there's a problem with this. It unlearns the lesson of the 1950s. We remember there was a consolidated bus terminal for a reason. It was not good having people scattered all over Midtown. Just like it's really not optimal to have Penn Station and Grand Central. It'd be great if it were one place. It's not that great that we have 3 airports throughout the region. It would be great if there were just one really good one. We're doubling down on lessons that we thought we learned the answer to. There's a second alternative. This is a Perkins plan. What they want to do is just clean slate, convert the Javits into an underground bus terminal full stop. The big problem that the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey has with this plan is sort of where you see those swirling yellow lines meeting the blue. The issue is the Lincoln Tunnel. In order to get that direct bus access that really characterized that original Port Authority bus terminal, that was sort of the secret sauce. Remember those ramps, those serpentine ramps? They would have to muck around with the ventilation shafts for the tunnel. They would have to really mess with traffic patterns and traffic flow. And then there's the question of, who really wants to board a bus in a basement? That's what we have at today's Port Authority today. That's not really a workable alternative. And then the final alternative is the build-in-place alternative, where things would just be done on the current footprint. The most rational of the people who are sort of advocating for this plan that I've heard is, try and deck above what exists now and then shut down what's below and dismantle that, renovate it, blah, blah. Again, a massive undertaking. And all 3 of these are massive. They would take billions of dollars and decades of time, tons of new construction, and New Yorkers are really tired of projects like East Side Access, like the 2nd Avenue subway, like the Fulton Center, where it's just sucking dollars down the drain and you don't really get something that great on the back end. So bottom line is, I looked at those 3 principles I learned from the Piano Project, and I thought, New York really deserves better than this. I looked really closely at that build-in-place alternative, and I thought about the existing infrastructure in the area right now. I thought we could do something with that. And the plan I came up with is something called Green Station. And I just want to walk you through that now and sort of spark your thoughts a little bit and see if anyone thinks it might be a good idea, because it really returns to the roots of the Port Authority. It creates something really interesting and fun for the next generation of bus travelers. I call Green Station New York's first transit park. It's a civilized place to catch a bus because you really are in lush parkland in the heart of Manhattan. It tames that tortured Trans-Hudson trek from the Lincoln Tunnel system into the Port Authority bus terminal by making it humane. And it also adds redundancy to Penn Station because it goes right up to Penn Station, as we'll see in a few moments. And it allows people, when the trains are down, to catch a bus and vice versa in very close proximity. It's also pretty close to the High Line, by the way, which we'll talk about in a few moments as well. And most importantly, it is made out of what we already have in place. A serpentine series of tunnels and ramps and open cuts known as the Lincoln Tunnel Expressway that few people really know exists. They've certainly been on it, but they couldn't plan it if they had to. So here's sort of a rundown of what I'm talking about in a little more specific terms. That Lincoln Tunnel Expressway, it is right next to the Port Authority bus terminal. It connects the Lincoln Tunnel to the outside areas. It goes down to the Penn Station district. What am I talking about? Here we're looking at a map, right? Up at the top, Port Authority bus terminal. Down at the bottom, see that big circle? That's Madison Square Garden. Penn Station's underneath it. To the left of it is the Farley Building, which will be the new Western Gateway to Penn Station, God willing, sometime soon. And then you see the Lincoln Tunnel Expressway there. Here it is highlighted, right? Really hidden in plain sight. Not a lot of people know about this expressway. It's underused and it is certainly underloved. And it is just not living up to its fullest potential. So I propose transforming it into a transit park. What does that mean? That means taking that expressway and transforming it. It means doing something in a very Jane Jacobs sort of a way, destroying a highway that spews exhaust, that really doesn't add much to the fabric of the city, which in fact takes it away, transforms it into bus gates situated within a linear park, all in the bed of the old expressway. And it frees up that Port Authority site, where the terminal is today, to be something interesting. What am I really talking about, though? I'm talking about the High Line with a place to catch a bus, right? It's that idea. It's something grand, a new civic amenity, where you just happen to get the bus to Jersey, to New England, or anywhere else. Now, there's plenty of room for all the people that are there today and more. This Green Station proposal has a capacity, a maximum daily capacity of 3.5 million passengers. Now, today, the Port Authority bus terminal, it's 250,000. As a practical matter, that's 125 in, 125 out, right? They use the sum of those two to estimate. And the figures that they're using, they don't even really count the intercity bus passengers. But we're looking at about 250,000 daily users of the current Port Authority bus terminal. But at Green Station, because you're arranging things as a station, not as a terminal, because buses can flow through in a high-speed fashion into sawtooth bus gates, as opposed to sort of backing in, sort of backing out, different places here, different places there, congestion in today's terminal, you can really speed things up. Breaking things up, for long distance departures, we have 20 high-speed gates situated in wider portions of the expressway. For commuter departures, we're looking at 35 high-speed gates, primarily situated in a big plaza that we're going to be looking at in a few moments that's right near Penn Station. And for arrivals, consolidated arrivals, we have 25 high-speed gates. And those are just for any bus that's coming in from the tunnel system or from the streets. They can drop off their passengers there within the park. I see a note from John Lawson in the chat, by the way. Buses would have to be electric or hybrid too. I would challenge folks to demand that of any bus. We are now in 2020, right? There's no reason for us to be calling this an unproven technology. Yes, our weather's different. Yes, our streets are deteriorated. Yes, this, yes, that. Agencies around the world are getting on board with hybrid and electric buses. Even if Green Station were a thing, we should be going in that direction. We owe it to our planet. But needless to say, John, the name of Green Station is green. I absolutely believe that we should have hybrid or electric buses in that facility. And here's what I'm talking about with the high-speed boarding gates. I call them pods, right? This is not having one big building for everybody boarding the bus. This is each individual gate having a cheery little pod where folks can board at their specific gate. And then when they're not waiting in line, they're exploring the park and they're using the city around them. Think about something about the size of a shipping container, right? So your standard 40-foot shipping container here, 40 feet long, 9.5 high, and a bench down the middle so that you can split it into two lines for people to wait, a boarding door with an attendant to manage the line, take tickets, and clean things up. Even if we have quite a few boarding gates, that's still a lower staffing level than today's current Port Authority, and we have eyes on the street, so to speak, in a very Jacobian way. And these boarding gates would be nestled into a linear park. So you wouldn't be so walled off from the city in the way that we are today at the Port Authority. We don't interact with things, right? We're in this strange hulking structure that is wholly removed from the city and that's deteriorating before our very eyes. How about a Highland type experience? That's what I'm talking about with Green Station. Now, here's what that sort of looks like plotted out. Those long distance departures would be situated at a place where the expressway sort of widens a bit and goes underneath an existing bridge so that it would be covered. But you would have those 20 high-speed long-distance gates up near 39th Street. You would have those commuter departures, as I mentioned, in the plaza that exists today near Pennsylvania Station. And you would have arrivals between 36th and 38th, again, in a spot where the expressway widens up a bit. and you would have direct access to the Lincoln Tunnel. I see a question from Steve. People move fast enough for 2 minutes boarding, people with kids, old people like me. I spent a bunch of time in Denver timing buses, right? Why did I go to Denver and time buses? Well, I was in law school in Denver and Boulder, so I was there anyway. But they run a very efficient operation out there. And when you actually run the clock from when people start to board the bus and when they're seated, you really get it to under 2 minutes if things are done in an efficient fashion, especially if you're tapping with your transit card. New Jersey Transit has announced that they're going to transit cards, similar to London with the Oyster card. MTA doesn't use today's Port Authority, but they're going to the Omni card. So we're talking about something very quick. And just to recall, there will be a gate agent at each of these gates to help manage that flow as well. And from what I've noticed, most people are not trying to drag their feet as they're boarding the bus. They're trying to get on as efficiently as possible. And even if we're talking about wheelchair lifts, we were talking about hybrid bus technology a few moments ago. We're not talking about the old NJ Transit cruisers anymore. The modern buses are having boarding down here at the lower level with ramps. And you can check out some of the newer MCI buses where they are doing just that, so that folks with wheelchairs, folks with mobility issues are able to board the bus at the same level of speed. And I'll try and throw a link in the chat so you can check those out. But that's where buses are really going for the long distance ones, and for the traditional city buses. They are really doubling down on low floor buses as well. So all of that is increasing the bus speeds. Jay-Z is asking, what about getting from JFK to Hohokus? That would be a question for whatever bus carrier is operating within the facility. But that sort of outlines where the gates would be situated within. Now, that brings us to the Lincoln Tunnel. I would dedicate one lane each of two of the tubes of Lincoln Tunnel. Make those a bus-only lane. It's about damn time. We have the express bus lane in the Lincoln Tunnel currently. It's been shut down for COVID, but it is the busiest HOV lane, I believe, on the globe, if their numbers are correct. But they're already having buses go in there in the morning, and we should have buses going in the opposite direction as well. There is no excuse for New York not to have dedicated bus lanes going into the heart of Manhattan. We are trying to draw people to transit. We are trying to discourage private vehicles. We are trying to ensure that people are behaving in a more green fashion. We really need to get on board with bus lanes. This is 2020 once again. So I propose dedicating 2 lanes. So the Lincoln Tunnel system has 6 lanes. It would be 2 for buses in and buses out. And then finally, we would repurpose those lower levels of the current Port Authority bus terminal. We would transform those into a layover facility for buses who do need to remain within Manhattan to lay over. So you can see there that sort of green rectangle thing with the ramps to the left. That's what the current Port Authority's footprint is. This is that operations plan, but basically sketched out for you so that you can see what it looks like in a little more detail for those of us who like those types of details. So we're looking at the middle tube of the Lincoln Tunnel, northmost lane. The buses are coming in and they're immediately spilling into that arrivals plaza. For those of you following up at home, you can check it out. You can go to www.greenstation.nyc. You can look at some of the maps, etc. You can see on Google Maps as well, where it widens right there in the Lincoln Tunnel system. So that's where buses would spill out. Then as the buses continue through the system, commuter departures would be down at that plaza near Penn Station. And as the buses continue through that expressway, it's treated as a loop. The long distance buses would be up north, being funneled into that southern tube of the Lincoln Tunnel. Now, if you're a bus that needs to lay over, or if you're not immediately picking up folks, you would proceed on city streets, just a really quick jog as we do today. It would be no different, but you would just head to the lower level of the Port Authority bus terminal as it is today to lay over, and then you would proceed along 41st, 11th, and 36th to get into the system to pick up your departures. It's a phased approach, but it's a really quick approach. Steve asks, how much disrupting and delay do you foresee in building converting? Phase 1, you've got to shut down the expressway. And I would argue that this is something we should be doing anyway. I was talking with a relative over dinner about a year ago about this plan, And he said, oh yeah, I remember the Lincoln Tunnel Expressway. It saves me like a minute to get from the Lincoln Tunnel to Chelsea. I don't think that's a very good rationale in 2020 for keeping an expressway that chops through the heart of Newtown. So we really need to shut it down, whether or not we do Green Station. But I would close it down. We would scrub it down, because you recall that picture from before. We would paint it green. In phase 2, we would add the foliage, the planters, hang up signs, and paint the lines for the buses and delineate the gates. Phase 3, we're inspecting it, training folks on it, and doing a dry run. Steve, to your question, you're asking about disruption and delay. When I think about rolling out Green Station, I think about doing it one of two ways. Now, we could do it phased, right? We could do it just as a standalone project, but I propose doing it as a companion to another plan I have. And this one is called Penn Central. And it's a plan to fix another dreaded transit space in Midtown Manhattan. That would be Penn Station. Penn Station is a tangled mess. And Steve, you are exactly right. It is a station as it exists today when you look at the track now. But it is not treated like a station. For the most part, with some exceptions, it is treated as a terminal. And the railroads bicker over track space and platform space. It is a wholly integrated facility. So I released my Penn Central plan back on January 8th. If you want to check it out, it's at www.penncentral.us. But that plan proposes transforming Penn Station, which also, like the Port Authority, is just really dingy and dirty. It is not a good place to be. And also, like the Port Authority, it is also falling apart at the seams. This is just one example. Penn Station, as we discussed at the beginning of this talk, opened in 1910. The infrastructure is decaying, and not just because during Hurricane Sandy the tunnels flooded and salt water came inside. It's just old, and it needs to be shut down and fixed. This is a shard of metal that came through the roof of a New Jersey Transit train, and it almost pierced and impaled a woman named Becky Bintram. I know we ask a lot of New Jersey Transit commuters, but we should not have to ask them, hey, do you mind being impaled, right? We need to fix Penn Station. We need to fix it now. Much like Green Station, Penn Central is a phased approach. It entails closing down the current complex, rebranding it, adding landmarks in a processional, the original pedestrian flow through the space. It's a very detailed plan, and you can look at it on your own time. But the bottom line is, we do need to shut down Penn Station. It has never been shut down, even during the demolition, right? A month-long shutdown in August would allow us, as Steve mentions, to convert it into a station type flow, to widen the platforms, to rationalize the system, and to clean it and fix it. And this is, the Penn Central plan incorporates a lot of the construction that's going on right now. It's a very light touch. It's a very inexpensive plan, but it's basically making Penn Station into a place. And this is the construction that's going on today. Same deal as with the 60s, right? The station never closed. So it deserves a good scrubbing. And, in order to provide landmarks, to rebrand the space using the existing infrastructure, to widen the platforms on a temporary basis, to assign based on direction of travel, making things more like a station, not a terminal. To do all that, to shut it down for the month of August 2021, to convert Penn Station into a place that is wonderful and dignified. I have a number of contingency plans, and one of them involves Green Station, right? For Amtrak, for Long Island Railroad, there are other plans. You can read about them online. But for New Jersey Transit specifically, I would create a bus bridge from Secaucus Junction using a pilot of Green Station so that we can prove that it works for that month of August during the shutdown. Secaucus Junction is a major hub. It is directly adjacent to the New Jersey Turnpike, which leads directly into the Green Station system, into the Lincoln Tunnel Expressway, into today's Port Authority. And New Jersey Transit just installed these great bus gates, sawtooth, you'll see, so named because they are like the teeth on a saw, so that buses can rapidly board and alight passengers there. So Green Station could be used as a pilot, as a temporary bus bridge during that 1 month shutdown of Penn Station, prove that it works, prove to New Yorkers that it's an interesting place to be, and I think the Port Authority might just want to keep it. So you could do it as a pilot project. But if folks really get behind this plan, if folks think, hey, you know what, a High Line for buses actually sounds pretty good. Jamal has concerns about an outdoor space with exposure to the elements. I agree. Parks do get rainy sometimes, but people also have umbrellas, right? And they do end up using those when they're on the streets going to the Port Authority anyway. And when you're waiting for your bus, you really are inside of the self-contained pod, which has a roof and is heated and has charging ports and all the amenities that passengers really deserve. So I agree, Jamal. I think outdoor could be a problem with exposure to the elements. But for people who are sort of sitting around waiting for the bus in those final minutes, we really don't have to worry about that. We would want to make sure that folks have enough space to hang out inside to wait for their bus. I'm just laughing because I see Steve's comment, a pod with a potty. We shared the article about that beloved makeup counter at the Port Authority bus terminal earlier. I would definitely add restroom facilities. That's something we absolutely must have. The potty should not be within the pod. It should be nearby. But I think in a nod to a place that people really love today, we should definitely have a makeup counter too, just to make sure that joy is not lost when we convert things over. The other thing I really like about this plan, it can be done in-house by the Port Authority. This is their expressway, right? They can play with their toys. They can make something happen that's innovative and inventive by passing a resolution. And there are complications when it comes to demapping expressways. This isn't really demapping an expressway. This is converting it to a bus facility. But I acknowledge that. But they have very talented lawyers in that agency, many of them who I know. They have a number of lawyers on their board of commissioners. And we have all of us in the public too. So I really think that this could be a quick and sort of homespun solution for them. And what I also really like is that it primes the site of the current bus terminal for redevelopment in a way that's not trying to squeeze people into the same outdated space. Just looking from right to left on this little plan here, the former North building, that notch that goes up, that could be the site of an air rights tower to pay for this whole thing, and then some. The site of the original South building where it says park, once again, we need to demolish the Port Authority bus terminal. We can keep relics of it that we like. We can even put them on display in the Green Station or somewhere else. But the facility is falling apart, and it's not worth trying to resurrect a patient who's already dead. So I would turn that into a full block park. Imagine how striking that would be, right across from the New York Times building, being able to look up and around, and it would be bigger than Bryant Park and in the heart of a wholly congested area. And then to the left, where those ramps are, I'm a preservationist. I say we keep them. We keep them, we preserve them, we integrate them into the park, and we convert them into a scenic overlook so that folks can experience the city. Here's a little bit more of a detailed view of what this would look like. So we're looking up at the right hand again. There's that site of the former North building, and there's the Air Rights Tower. Looking below it, there's that site of the South building. That would be a whole block park. How nice would that be? And then the old bus ramps connected to the linear park, those dashed lines, using the sort of swirling circular ramps that we have today. Again, check out this area on Google Maps. There's so much that could be so interesting for folks to reuse. And then you see a more detailed look at how the buses would interact with the Lincoln Tunnel system, with arrivals coming in and the buses going out with that long distance departure area there, the arrivals there. We're coming away from the whole system because we're looking at a close-up view here, but you sort of get the idea. Here's how we would take the expressway and convert it. On the left, on the right, that's how a typical highway works, and it's exactly how the Lincoln Tunnel Expressway works. Traffic flows in 2 lanes in one direction, 2 lanes in the other. I'm using out and in, just referring to the Lincoln Tunnel itself. So on the left, those are the lanes flowing out of Lincoln Tunnel. On the right, flowing in. You would convert it so that the buses would flow through the station complex using those left lanes as a 2-way instead of a divided highway. Then a linear park where folks could bike, where they could just enjoy themselves on a bench. They would be able to run, jog. That linear park portion would be available to them. Jerry's asking a question. If you demolish the South building, wouldn't the ramps have to come down too? You would be able to keep some of the structural elements there in the current building to hold up the ramps. I would defer to an engineer on how exactly we would do that. But I think it could be done. I don't think you need to keep the entire full block structure. I think you could keep some of the supports there on the westernmost portion to support that kind of structure. But I agree, Jerry, that is a huge undertaking. But I don't necessarily think that we should throw out the baby with the bathwater. Here's a closer look at how to convert an expressway segment. Once again, for those of you playing along at home, 10th Avenue and 34th Street. And there is the Lincoln Tunnel Expressway in the center there. So sort of overlaying what this looks like over a typical segment, you would see the buses would travel on the left and the right, and that big, broad linear park on the right. It would be an interesting way to engage with the city, almost like a low version of the highway. But I'm most excited about those ramps that I was just talking about with Mr. Rosen a moment ago. They're huge. They're serpentine. You can see them from everywhere in that part of town, and they go really, really high. They're broad. They're flat. They're perfect for folks who are unable to do stairs but may be able to do ramps. Folks in powered wheelchairs could certainly use this. Folks who are being pushed would be able to make it up. Walkers, joggers, bikers could all encounter these ramps. And they really do soar as high as the treetops, which I'm so excited about. And best of all, they have that view once you get to the top. This is taken from the top of the ramps up at the westernmost portion of that top parking deck. And look at the New York Times building, the skyline around you. So I would just propose keeping those ramps and having a grand scenic overlook. How nice would that be? And of course, in the center of it, in sort of an homage to our project to improve the current Port Authority, we'd place a piano there, just to have an element of joy, happiness for folks who may be entering New York for the first time, explore their way up these ramps, and they get a grand overview over the entire city. Again, an homage to our current piano. Now, just a quick peek at the southern end. We have the commuter departures. They butt up really close to the High Line. It's a big open plaza. We'll see it in a minute. That would be a great place for all of those commuter pods. And then we have Moynihan Station, Penn Station. For those of you who aren't as familiar with Moynihan, that's just the westernmost part of Penn Station. It's a big, beautiful old post office. It was also McKim structure. McKim Mead and White. McKim, I believe, was dead by the time they were building it. I don't think he drew up the plans, but it was the firm who did the Farley building as it was renamed. It was a big post office. It's being converted to, among other things, Facebook's offices, but also a station facility to expand Penn Station. And then the red is the current footprint. Green Station is just touching right up against all of that. And where you see sidewalk connection, those are already, in the Penn Station portion near Moynihan, are already becoming pedestrian plazas. So it really connects seamlessly to the mid-block Green Station portion. And there's that plaza for the commuter departures. See those down at the bottom, just touching the High Line. It's right there. I actually took this picture from the High Line. And we're looking at what the plaza looks like now. It's already used for buses, right? These are Transbridge layovers currently. And they're just sort of stacked there. They're Academy layovers up there near the sort of curved building, and that's a Port Authority lot there. This could be used as a big open park with bus gates for commuter buses, folks. I mean, it would be a really light touch to convert this, and I think the neighbors would prefer it a lot more. A lively park that's touching the High Line. Think about that connectivity to the existing system. So that's sort of the overview of it, right? Bus gates in a linear park on an old expressway, scenic overlook from the ramps, a full block park up on the footprint of the South Building, and a tower on the footprint of the North Building. That's Green Station. I think it's the hub that New York needs now, especially because of the fact that the coronavirus really does not like outdoor spaces. And as I shared in Newsday a couple of weeks ago, this is not going to be the last respiratory virus. Our world, is still more connected than ever. There will be more diseases. There will be more viruses. I was reading one of the health experts today saying what concerned him most for years was airports, where you're nose to nose with people. Green Station really gives you that level of breathing space, lungs for the city. And it really is well within our reach as well, because it's really cheap and it's really fast. You're really just taking an expressway that no one really likes and turning it into a park with some paint, some plants, some pods, and a little bit of inventive thinking. Steve is asking how much support do you have from this like from the board, not just old white guys who never take a bus, but also corrupted self-dealings, quid pro quos, etc. That is a very good question. It is under consideration by the Port Authority now, but I would encourage all of you to go to their website and to write into them and encourage them to look at the green station plan. And something tells me that they may be giving it a harder look now that, they're looking at their capital program and they're thinking, on the one hand, if we got a great big stimulus program, we could build that $12 billion bus terminal on the site of the Javits. But is that coming? Even if there's a different administration federally, are we going to get that much money? Can we really bond ourselves into that? These are questions for all of these agencies where they're thinking to themselves, how are we going to make this happen money-wise? Are we going to have to dip into our capital budgets in order to pay for operations? Most of these agencies, their ridership went to 5% during COVID, and I think New Jersey Transit is at 30% on their bus system right now, based on the latest figures I saw. So this, I think, is more and more appealing. Steve asked about cost estimates. I'm really not one to throw numbers out there. I think this is a concept. I think people would need to take a closer look, but I would encourage people to remember that this is just using an asset that already exists, and it's a plan that, it's not something that out of the box. It's using an expressway and painting it, adding plants, adding pods. That meat and potatoes part of it, that's a $5 million operation. Now you would have to go ahead and get the consultants, you would have to get the approvals, you would have to do all of that jazz, and that, of course, as we know, adds to every project in Gotham. But as to the meat and potatoes itself, just think about what a light touch this is, what a homespun approach this is, what a people-driven approach this is. I don't think it'll be that costly. So honestly, let's bid adieu to the Port Authority as it exists today. We can do better. New York, it really deserves a green station. So I thank you so much for joining me this evening. It has been such a joy seeing you engaging with me on the chat, seeing so many of your memories. Steve's talking about when he was 7 in 1957, when it didn't strike him as nice. Not much has changed, it was very Spartan as we saw back then, but just hearing all the memories, hearing all the feedback, it's just been a phenomenal evening. Thank you so much. We have officially 3 minutes, but I will stay as long as you like to answer your questions. So a big round of applause to all of you. Thank you so much. And let's start taking your questions. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Erica. I appreciate it. So I'm just going to take a sip of water. If anybody has questions, submit them now. And I mentioned it very briefly earlier, but if you do have a moment, please do write into the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. You can just Google, find their website, and just contact them and encourage them to look at this plan if you so desire. If not, that's also okay. So let's check out the questions tab. We have a question from Jamal. Given the poor accessibility of Penn Station, particularly the subways, do you think the system could take the influx of bus passengers that would otherwise use the Times Square complex? So the Times Square complex, as we saw earlier, and I'm just going to pull something up again, if I can. There we go. Just to refresh people's memories. It's usually more helpful to have an image in front of us. Where you see bus terminal, that is where that old bus terminal was, and just on its right is where the connection to the subway system is. It exists today, and I would keep that on Green Station as well. And then if we're looking at the north wing, right, so that's that notch that they added in the 80s above, there's also a subway connection there. So if we're looking at the 40th and 41st Street block and the 41st and 42nd Street block, there's a subway connection at both places. So then if you take a look at, sorry for jumping around here, folks, but if you look at Green Station, where we're converting that north building footprint and that south building footprint, you would have subway access to the parks right there. And the arrivals are coming in at 39th Street. They're really spilling into the 38th, 39th, 37th area. There's a nice ramp there, once again, for folks who are playing along at home. People would spill into the city streets. It's a really high number. I don't want to give you the wrong number because I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it is more than half of the people who use the Port Authority bus terminal, at least before COVID, they would walk to work. And when I used the Port Authority commute, And when I use the jitney buses nearby, I would walk to work as well. So we are talking about a considerable number of people headed to the subways. That's not going to change. But a lot of people would be distributed throughout the street network in order to get to their workplaces or their places of leisure or wherever. And for those people who aren't, they would be able to use the linear park component and the city grid to get to those subway nodes. My suspicion is that more people would actually end up walking down to Penn Station to catch a train, just one stop away from the Port Authority stop, the Port Authority Times Square stop, because it does have a lot of the same lines, not all of them converging there. But I think if you're spilling out of the arrivals, when you look at the way Green Station is configured, you're moving south. So I think a lot more people who are headed to the subway would head to the Penn Station subway stations, which again would be on that 9th Avenue side with the new Western Concourse that, knock on wood, will be opening up soon. But I think it's a great question, Jamal, on the influx of bus passengers on the subway system that would otherwise use the Times Square complex. Now, I'm going to check the questions or the chat feature as well, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. If anybody has any other questions, please let me know. You said you are a preservationist. Open House New York is looking for a new executive director. That is very kind of you, Michael. And thank you for joining us on prior excursions as well. I will certainly take a look at that. I'm a little tied up for the next couple of months. I'm going to be clerking for a United States bankruptcy judge up in Syracuse between September and February. And after that, we'll see what happens. But thank you. I appreciate that. Now we have a question from Steve. When Port Authority was established in 1920-ish, the year was 1921, when we got that port compact, was there precedent? Was there anything like that before? Was it wishful thinking that it wouldn't be a political infused with demon sperm? I could never accuse you, Steve, of not having some of the best adjectives on this presentation tonight. Thank you for your wonderful language throughout. You know, it really was a Wilsonian model of the independent agency. This was the era where folks had a lot of faith in administrators and administration. They thought that an independent entity like the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey would be a great way to veer away from the sort of Tammany instincts that New York politics had. You know, the Jersey instincts. I mean, we know, of course, that places like Standard Oil would set up shop in Jersey because it's a little easier to buy people off in Jersey, although it's very easy to do that in New York as well. So I think it was a very aspirational model. There was not much precedent. I mean, interstate compacts exist. We have, for example, for those of you who are Jersey people, you know the Delaware River. There's the, oh man, if I can get this right, I'm going to get myself a calculator. I think it's the Delaware River Joint Toll Bridge Authority, DRJTBA or something. They're an interstate compact, right? They are the agency that runs the bridges that run between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We also have things like the interstate compacts for driver's licensing, which is why you can share your driver's license info across state lines, and you can trade in your New York for New Jersey and all that jazz. So these are all things that are out there now. But yes, it was a very innovative concept. But in the years that followed, the word that Senator Chuck Schumer of New York likes to use for the Port Authority is the honeypot. He calls it a honeypot because the analogy being a bear likes to put his paw into the pot and eat the honey. And that's what a lot of politicians have done over the years with the Port Authority. You know, in addition to his shenanigans using the Port Authority for political punishment, and see some recent Supreme Court cases for some more details on that. There have been other shenanigans as well. Christie really didn't want to raise the gas tax because he was running for president. So he figured out a way to get the Port Authority to call the Pulaski Skyway an approach road to I think it was the Holland Tunnel, and that somehow got him the money to replace that decaying structure without raising the tax. So yes, it is a monster of an agency, at least in recent history, but I think there are some well-intentioned people there now. As I mentioned, their board is getting a lot more diverse and a lot more dedicated, so that's a promising sign. But to give you a sense of where I'm at with all this, I'm looking in my other life, I'm looking more at federal level instrumentalities to solve the issue of these sort of Robert Moses era independent authorities in our region, where You have the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, which is part of MTA. You have the Port Authority, this 1920s vestige. All these independent agencies that, they aren't really looking at the big picture. So, for example, one thing I'm releasing through the Transportation Law Journal in the coming year is something called the Metropolitan Railroad Act, which would unify things like PATH, New Jersey Transit, Metro North, Long Island, all these agencies that really should be under one roof. There's no reason we should be running the subways and Long Island Railroad and all this with separate bureaucratic fiefdoms. They should really be one consolidated entity. I understand that the power systems are different. Sometimes the clearances are different, but at the end of the day, apples, oranges, and bananas are all fruit. So I think we should be looking more federally. Stay tuned for that. Taking another look at the questions tabs. How about extending the subway to New Jersey? That's been bandied about. Yes, Lucy, it has been. Mayor Bloomberg was actually a big proponent of that. The idea was, let's bring the 7 train, which was already brought to the Hudson Yards complex. Let's extend that under the Hudson River through a new tunnel, possibly with a station at Hoboken, and then terminating at Secaucus Junction. Why does that help the interstate bus problem? Well, the theory is those new bus gates that we were looking at Secaucus, you would get off your New Jersey bus there, and you would transfer to the subway and make your way into Manhattan. I have 2 issues with that proposal. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I just think it falls a little short for bus commuters for 2 reasons. Number one, it will cost billions of dollars and take decades of time. And as I think people are starting to sense with my presentation this evening, I'm not about that. Let's do things quickly and let's do them very inexpensively while not sacrificing things like aesthetics and functionality. So that's a problem. And then the second thing, a lot of my colleagues like to diminish something called the one-seat ride. They think it's silly that people want a one-seat ride from work to home, from home to work. But if anyone's ever ridden something like the Raritan Valley line on New Jersey Transit, or even if you've transferred from locals to expresses, those are just pinch points in your commute. You have to get your bags. If you're disabled, you have to figure out a way to use whatever semblance of an ADA system is at your station to move about. So I think those 2 problems, the cost time problem, and then the lack of a one-seat ride, where you'd have to change from your bus to a subway at Secaucus, I think that would be a real challenge for that plan. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing it get a little more traction. I'm checking out the chat again. We have a lot of questions here. Okay, so let me see here. Steve asks, wasn't the Tappan Zee Cuomo built to avoid the Port Authority? That is correct. We are talking, though, about the original Tappan Zee Bridge, the Eisenhower-era bridge that was recently demolished. That was indeed built just north of the Port Authority's border because the New York State Thruway Authority wanted its bureaucratic fleet, and they didn't want that pesky Port Authority competing for jurisdiction. So those of you who use the Tappan Zee Bridge, you'll know that it's a big, long, wide bridge in one of the widest parts of the river. The reason it is there and not further down where, for example, where the GWB is narrower and other parts of the Hudson are narrower in that area, is because they were expressly trying to avoid Port Authority jurisdiction. Steve also asks, how is the ironically named Robert Moses connected with Port Authority? He was his own authority. He was. Moses wore many hats. One of the things he did, he ran state parks. He was an advisor to Al Smith. He was a man about town in many ways. And he was never part of the Port Authority. He did somewhat coordinate with them on their what they call their joint arterial plan for New York, and that was the system of expressways, somewhat completed but not entirely, that would have stitched together the western crossings that were a Port Authority operation, and the eastern crossings, which of course were MTA Triborough, now MTA, but then just Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority crossings. Albert asks, what always puzzled me was why didn't the PA attract upscale grocery deli stores like Trader Joe's, Dean DeLuca, or Balducci's that would have built in an audience of commuters and would attract a local population? And the place would feel safer and more secure with vendors attracting a larger population. I think that's correct, and Lucy says she agrees. I think that's an excellent point, and to their credit, I think they really have tried that over the years. The problem is, if you go down to the ticket concourse in the South Building, for example, and you see where the New York Blood Center donation spot used to be, they've been trying to lease out spaces like that for a very long time. In fact, they were trying to lease out our Fishbowl for a while. They have other spaces that are art galleries run by a friend of mine that are really not leasable space. they can try and attract, right? And they have attracted upscale tenants in recent years. They have the Dunkin' Donuts on near the Fishbowl that actually is seen as a victory for the Port Authority. They have the spruced up Joint Reed. It is a very heavily trafficked space. Oh, Heartland closed. I'm sorry to hear that, Lucy. But at the end of the day, if people don't want to lease it, people don't want to lease it. And I think there is still the fact that it is not a welcoming structure. I think there's a fear that it's not as upscale of a clientele. I think you see a lot more conveniences in there, like places where you can get a tall boy before taking your bus trip, but you don't necessarily see those higher end places. It's almost a chicken and egg situation, right? But I think in a green station type environment, and I'm not trying to make this personal, you can think about Grand Central Terminal, which is one of the most highly regarded retail locations there is. These places really do attract people because they're wonderful places. But it's hard to really get at the root of what ails the Port Authority bus terminal without just doing it. And I hear your point, Albert, about captive audiences. But the fact remains, they have brought in a Starbucks. They have brought in that Dunkin' Donuts. They have brought in other vendors. They have bowling alleys, folks know and appreciate. But I know it is an ongoing challenge for them. And I think it'll only be more so with the coming administration, with the pandemic and the coming fallout from that. So I'm scanning through here to see if you have any more questions. If you got them, please throw them in the chat or throw them in the questions tab. I'm just trying to make sure that I have everything in here. I don't want to be ignoring anybody. I still see there are 17 of you. So I'm going to go ahead and call last call. If we have any other questions, please throw them in the chat. And I'm just going to give you a minute or two to do that. Not a minute, a moment or two to do that. But then once again, just from the bottom of my heart, thank you so, so much. Once again, I'm going to throw in the chat the websites for you to check out, www.greenstation.nyc. If you're interested in the Penn Central plan, www.penncentral.us. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about me, www.adrianuntermyer.com. And of course, please do go to the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey's website and drop them a line if you think this is a good plan. So I issue a very sincere thank you to all of you. Albert, Bayan, thanks as well. This has been such a fun evening. Thank you for your engaged and informed participation. Have a phenomenal evening. And with that, if Corey would like to have a few closing words, please go ahead. But thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Yes, Adrian, thank you so much for gracing the stage and not just teaching us about this quote unquote most hated transit hub, but the solutions to fix it. I have some personal experience with a couple of things that you mentioned. One is the Lincoln Expressway. I have when I do rent a zip car, I do take advantage of that, and I will also say that it is empty every time. It's only us, which it's nice, but of course you have to think about the greater good, and that could definitely be better utilized. It's right by. Everything you said was on point. And I also, my parents live on the Raritan Valley line, so I can tell you personally that doing that transfer at Newark Penn Station is horrible. Even though it's, maybe you have to walk 30 extra steps, you have to go up and down. It's just a pain in the butt. So anything to get a direct way, and maybe more people would definitely utilize and take that line. But I'll digress because that can get into a tangent. But Adrian, this is fantastic, and thank you everyone for for joining us tonight and for amazing questions. I guess this is an ongoing discussion, so maybe a silver lining of everything that's happening in today's world, that the Greenway, the Green Station, maybe it's more attainable, whereas a couple months ago it would be a little more unthinkable or harder to pass through. So Adrian, I urge you to continue, and everyone check out those great sites, greenstation.nyc, penncentral.us, and of course, adrianuntermyer.com for a little more details. But check out adventureclub.com to see our upcoming virtual adventures. And as a reminder, you will get access to the replay of this experience for 1 week once we end the webinar in a couple minutes. So definitely take advantage to rewind and check out some of those great slides. So Adrian, thank you so much. This is awesome. Keep on grooving on the piano. That's coming from a fellow piano player. And thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening.